Welcome everyone to episode 6 of Talking Talent. Today we have not one, but two of my colleagues on the show. Doug Smith is here. He is a partner at Cordia who leads business development efforts, and Sharronne Swann, who's a recruiting manager on our temp staffing team. Together, they bring over 35 years of experience in the recruiting and staffing world, mostly focused in the temporary space. Hope you enjoy the episode. Don't forget to subscribe. All right. Well, hi, everyone out there, and thank you for joining us for our 6th episode of Talking Talent. I would love if you would tell your friends and coworkers about it. Subscribe on Spotify or Amazon or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, I'm Sam McCarthy, and I lead the Human Resources practice here at Cordia, and I am joined today by two of my teammates. In the past, we had on current teammate, but Nat Jones, who talked about the what's going on out there in the accounting and finance world and executive search. Today, I have two experts in the world of temporary staffing and consulting. So first of all, I want to introduce Doug Smith, who's a partner at Cordia. And Doug, I want to call you client relationship guru. I don't know if that is something you've been called before, but client relationship guru. Doug has over 20 years of recruiting and staffing experience, and mostly in the business and development and client management world. So thanks for joining us, Doug.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Sam.
And Sharronne Swann, who's a recruiting manager here at Cordia on our temp staffing team, and someone who works more closely with clients and then candidates. Sharronne also brings many years of experience to the table and has definitely seen the market evolve over the years. Thanks for joining us, Sharronne.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sam.
All right. So let's get to it. Today, we are talking about temporary staffing. We haven't done this on the show as of yet. We've probably touched on it in parts of previous conversations when we've gone down other paths, but we haven't really dug into it. This is an interesting time of the year in the temporary staffing world when we're near the holidays, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But as always, to start us off, I'm very curious, both of you. What was the first job that you had? It could be first job you had when you were 16, or maybe first job out of college, something like that. And is there any correlation to what you're doing right now and your first job? Sharronne, I'm going to start with you first.
Yeah, I think that there definitely is. So I got my first job when I was 14. I was so excited to get that work permit and get working during the summers. So I started the first 3 years working as a camp counselor, dealing with younger adults. I was young myself, but dealing with younger adults. So I think that there's definitely a correlation in being a recruiter. We're not just looking at resumes and matching skill sets. We're helping people with the biggest transition of their life, or one of the biggest transitions in life, whether they're moving from one job to another or they're in between jobs. It's a huge transition for people. So there's a lot of coaching, counseling, and hand-holding during that process. And I think I definitely got an early start, when I was, 16, working that summer job.
Were you a camp counselor was everyone younger than you, or were there some people who were older than you too?
No, they were all younger. It was like Park and Recreations. My grandmother kind of ran that program. So they were all younger kids, but they were foster children. So it was a little more challenging than just dealing with, everyday children.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility. That's really interesting. I had some kind of coaching experiences similarly back then, although it was, what you were doing sounds like it was much more challenging, but I agree on the correlation there. Doug, how about you?
Wow, it's so funny. My first job was when I was 17, actually two jobs. I started with Parks and Recreation during the summers, working as a playground counselor in some of the underprivileged neighborhoods in the city I grew up in. So you really serve as a mentor and really as a best buddy and friend to a lot of the kids during the summertime. It was a city-sponsored program to help kids stay off the streets and really engage with some really fun mentoring and playground activities. And my other job, which I did at the same time in the evening, I was a baseball park vendor. So I actually sold programs and ice cream, and I was the only person selling it. So I kind of had a corner on the market, and it was a commissioned role, and I'd get to watch some great baseball, but also be a baseball park vendor. So
Wow.
Yep. Definitely both
Was
correlations
there like a
to what
minimum wage involved with that? But then you just, was there, all the money you made was all based on commission?
It was all commission. So for I was salaried for the Parks and Recreation job, obviously through the city, but the baseball was 100% commission. I only got paid if I sold a product. So
was it like a minor league feel or something like that?
yeah, it was a single A ball club affiliated with Cleveland, and then later with the New York Yankees. So it was a single A ball team.
Nice. That's cool. Hey, I mean, that's a great way to get introduced to all kinds of different people and how to talk with them and how to figure out how they, what works. And you can't use every the same tactic on everyone when you're trying to sell that. That's great. Well, I've shared this. I've shared before. But my correlation is that I worked at a grocery store in kind of part-time when I was 16, and really monotonous, stocking shelves, something that really didn't at the time, I think, take a lot of planning. You kind of showed up, yet it was kind of monotonous. But I really I think I enjoyed it in the sense that it was at the time I didn't have to think for myself a lot. You guys were both doing things that were much more interesting from a having responsibility and kind of managing your own time. I was really just coming in and doing something that was kind of boring, but did put a little bit of money in my pocket. So, okay, so let's get to the meat of this. Be hard pressed to find two people who have more experience combined in temporary staffing and what that means. We use a lot of words. There's I just know it within Cordia we use the word temp, we use the word project, we use the word consultant. There's all these different words out there. Doug, I'll start with you in terms of what does the market, this is really high level, what does the market look like right now for companies, specifically in the Washington, D.C. metro area, which is where Cordia operates? What does the market look like right now for companies that need temp or contract support?
Well, for the offset, Sam, as you mentioned earlier in the call, I've been doing this 23 years, specifically in the Washington, D.C. metro market. And I'll go on record as saying it is the tightest talent market for temporary and consulting professionals that I've ever seen, really for a couple of reasons. I think there's just low unemployment still existing in the market. I know in the news we hear about the great resignation. I really call it, in my vernacular, the great transition. No one's really sitting on the couch, eating popcorn now. People have just transitioned to other roles. They've also transitioned out of the DC metro market. And so it is a tight employment market for temporary and consultants right now.
And is there some correlation to, everything is like pre-COVID, post-COVID. I hear myself using those terms all the times, but I know things changed a lot. Doug, what has changed what are the biggest changes since March 2020? Is it an industry shift? Is it types of roles? Is what you're talking about is there a correlation to COVID, or was this something that was going to happen anyway?
I think over the years, I've seen less people graduate from college with finance and accounting degrees. And I think a lot of those folks who did have those majors in the past, Sam, have been shifting into the IT realm, quite honestly. So even when you look at the big four accounting firms, they've had to change their recruiting strategy. And historically, when I got into recruiting, we would pull a lot of talent from the big four. They would do these really large hiring classes, and over time they would transition out of the big four. That source of candidates has kind of dried up, and again, they didn't disappear. They've moved into the IT segment. When we talk pre and post COVID, pre-COVID, really there were a lot of what I would call light barriers to entry. If you were specializing in nonprofit, it was difficult for you to all of a sudden say, okay, I'm going to go work for a government contractor now, and vice versa. Companies pre-COVID were much more insistent on certain software packages. Also, geography came into play. Where does that person live? Are they going to be able to make that commute? all of those barriers are now down, which is a big benefit to the folks out there that want to do consulting. But it's also, because it's a talent short market, there's still not enough people to fill the jobs. And I'm also seeing a very high, what I call temp to hire conversion rate, which means, whereas before, Sharronne and I may have had a repeat consultant for many years. Now that person's being picked up because they can't fill the permanent jobs. So now they're going and turning to our consultant and temporary population as a source of that permanent hire.
Sharronne, what do you think? Any insight on any follow-up on what Doug shared there?
I certainly agree with Doug. Right now, we're still in, a candidate-driven market, and we've seen this before. It's just that it hasn't lasted as long, but we're definitely in a candidate-driven market. But they do have a benefit. You don't have to necessarily live in that area. There is a little bit more flexibility on the candidate side, so they do have that, and that's a great change since 2020.
And Doug, what have the I know over the years how you've been able to develop relationships and how you've stayed close to clients has certainly morphed and changed since you've started this business. How have things changed over the past couple of years? Again, what are some different ways that you've been able to stay engaged with current clients and current people you've known for a long time, or new businesses out there? How's that shifted for you?
That is a great question, Sam, because it really it's taken some really creative thinking, because before I was a very on-site, very present professional. If you asked me how many clients I was personally engaged with on a weekly basis, I would be engaged with probably 20 to 25 people in person a week, whether that be on the client site, whether that be in my Cordia office. Now that has shifted. It's so funny. Now I'm going more or less to people's neighborhoods because people are now working from home. So instead of walking into a company and seeing 15 people in the cubicles, I'm now going to lunch with one person or having breakfast with one person. So that has absolutely changed my methodology and approach. And you've got to start leveraging technology, just like we're doing for this podcast. Zoom, telephone, text, email are much, much more critical, as is, in my opinion, going to some events and trying to see people in groups where you can catch them. Really interesting. I think the companies, and I talk about this with clients sometimes, if you're not able to adapt and you're stuck in your ways for how we communicated, even, and it sounds weird, but even it really is amazing how things have shifted just since March 2020. And if the people who have been slow to adapt to that have certainly fallen behind, whether you're a firm like Cordia that has, let's say 40 employees, or you're much smaller or much bigger. If you don't adapt to that in some capacity, you're going to miss out on opportunities. So that's great to hear. And I do agree. It's this fine line between relying too much on technology and too much on, obviously we have some amazing marketing that we do and some amazing, the amazing ability to get our name out in multiple different ways. And that middle ground between seeing people enough that you keep that relationship up in person and not fully rely on virtual. So yeah, it's a tough dynamic. It's be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so. Sharronne, in terms of the candidate market right now, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but what are candidates looking for right now, who are the people you're talking to and the roles the kind of temp or contract roles you're working on? What are candidates looking for right now? What does that market look like?
It's very small, as Doug said. Finding contract talent is challenging. Most of the candidates that I run into, let's say, I reached out last week, I would say, to about 200 candidates. I got a response of 50. And out of that, I would say 80% of them were looking for direct hire opportunities. And then wanting remote is really huge. So the candidates are looking for direct hire and remote. We are trying to educate them on where the market is, because there's that big gap where companies are looking for candidates to come into the office rather than be remote, or not fully in office, but hybrid at least. So just educating the candidates on where we are in the market, clients are looking more for at least hybrid. And then contract could be a good way to get your foot in the door. So just trying to educate them on that. But direct hire remote is the driver right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know Doug mentioned a lot more conversions. Are you, how many people are you talking to are already maybe on a contract elsewhere, and you're talking to them and providing them with a better opportunity? And how many of those people are just not working at all? I would imagine there are still a lot of people that are working, but are maybe just still on the lookout for a better opportunity.
Absolutely. I would say 90% of the people that I talk to are working, whether they're in a permanent job and they're just miserable, so they're willing to look at contract, or they're contracting for another organization and either wrapping up or looking to jump to another contract.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I know remote work has really changed the whole dynamic. And as someone who works a lot in the human resources and talent acquisition space, and talking with clients who are looking for professionals who work in those spots, it is human resources is I'd say more so, in a world where you have to, you need some kind of face-to-face interaction. So it's less likely for those roles to be truly fully remote, where you can really live anywhere in the country and do your job. Do you find that in accounting and finance specifically, where you are, mostly working in, have you found that when you have a call with a client and they're telling you about what they need, do you feel a little bit more empowered now to say to them, listen, this is going to be really tough if you're requiring someone to come on site 4 or 5 days a week? How has that kind of cadence changed when you're having that discussion with the client about what they need?
Yeah, I definitely feel empowered because this is what the market is. So as I mentioned, educating my candidates, you have to educate the clients as well, letting them know what we're seeing. And like I said, remote is driving it. I am pushing hybrid to both candidates and clients because I think that is a happy medium for both, and they both can come in on that level. But yeah, definitely letting my clients know we need to at least do hybrid, because if they're looking for someone to be in the office 100%, it really is challenging. It will take me, months to find someone, if I find someone, but it really is challenging. People have moved outside of the area, so they are looking for remote. Or you know what? When I say candidates, it's a candidate-driven market. You have to think candidates have become used to a certain lifestyle. Maybe it's, now I have to pick up my kids, or I'm spending more time with the kids, or my husband and I, we got rid of a car. We only have one car now. There's so many lifestyle transitions that have happened over the past couple of years where, it's almost like they have no other choice but to do remote to adapt to the lifestyle that they have now.
Yeah, and they have options. I mean, people, if you have some leverage and you have multiple opportunities, sometimes you could use that to your advantage. Sometimes you're going to maybe overplay your hand and someone's going to call your bluff and say, no, you can't work fully remotely. But yeah, it's really interesting. And I think a year from now, I'll be curious to see if we're in the same place, or if more people are going to be in the office. I mean, there's no shortage of construction and buildings going up around here and offices being built out, and someone's going to have to go in there. And I know some of it's apartments and condos and buildings, but there's definitely no shortage of new offices being created. But it's tough to have a space where you have 300 desks and only 50 people there. But no, thank you for sharing that. I know it's really interesting. Doug, any thoughts on that in terms of when in your conversations, high level conversations with clients, on what they're seeing in terms of the candidate market?
Yeah, it's interesting. As Sharronne said, I would say in COVID, it was 100% remote. Now, when I'm speaking to my clients, they're really looking ideally for a hybrid situation. I would say 80% of my clients now are trying to achieve a hybrid situation, and with 10% still pushing for in-office and the other 10% saying, oh, I'm still fine with fully remote. And to your point, Sam, I think it's really what drives a lot of it. But take outside, the team camaraderie and working together, the values of being in one place. Really, it's economic. It's to what you just said. It's people have real estate space. People have invested in buildings, and especially, we work on the accounting side. Those are dollars, those are fixed costs that need to be accounted for. And it will be really interesting to see what happens in the corporate real estate market across the next 5 years. Do we continue to see the push for an extra day of hybrid, moving towards fully in office? Or do we see a complete rearrangement of current existing office structure? Some of our clients are sitting on multiple floors of empty, quote unquote, cubicles. So it's going to be really interesting. That's what I'm seeing. And I'm out there pretty actively still in the market, going and visiting client sites. So I do walk into, and whereas before I'd walk in and see a 100-person cubicle group, now I'm seeing 6 people sitting in a 100-person cubicle group. So
yeah.
Fascinating from a development perspective on my side.
It sounds like a big takeaway is that there are, at least from what you and Sharronne both said, there are much higher percentage of candidates that are, as people who you both mentioned would go from work 3 months on a project because they're covering maternity leave to then covering for another 3 months somewhere else because of someone else on leave, and they like going from project to project. There's many more people that are either, whether it's seeing the benefits of having a permanent job with benefits, with that kind of that kind of foundation of so it sounds like that's kind of a trend. If that's the case, putting you both on the spot a bit because we didn't talk about this, but what's the next level of are more companies going to take chances on people who might come in at a staff accountant level that may not have every single skill that they need? Are they going to be willing to pay for someone who's not quite a finished product and have some of the skills? But if it's that tight, are you seeing people, companies taking chances on candidates that they wouldn't have 5 years ago just because it's so tight? Is there going to be a change there, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it definitely makes sense. And I have seen it a little. I'd like to see it much more, to be honest with you, Sam, because I do think that there's a benefit there. I think that there's a benefit to the candidate and the client, bringing someone in who may not check off every box, but they're capable of learning and capable of doing that job. I think that it's definitely a benefit to the client, outside of waiting for that perfect candidate to come, because we're in such a tight market that just may not happen. You're really competing right now. So finding a really good candidate that is capable, I think, is definitely beneficial. So I'd like to see it happen a lot more, but it's been happening a little.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's really, really, really interesting right now. And what, to take away from, for both of you, Doug, can start with you. What tips and advice do you have for someone who's listening to this, who, whether you're a 50-person nonprofit who's not used to, using temporary help, or you're a large publicly traded company? What tips and advice do you have for someone who are deciding on getting support from a firm like Cordia? How would you go about engaging with us?
Yeah, it's a great question. First and foremost, and I'm speaking from the client's perspective, gather the requirements of the job you want done. Not the perfect job description that you're pulling out of your HR file, but really ascertain in this new environment that your current team is running, right? Some people are probably remote, some are hybrid. When you're looking to fill this need, what are the must-haves in the job tasks and responsibilities? And then also, secondarily, what are the nice-to-haves? So have a clearly defined goal and objective for the person coming in the door. It makes it much easier for Sharronne and our team to really zero in on that right person. I think, secondly, from the client side, evaluate how this person is going to integrate into your current team. And by that, I mean, who will be leading them, who will be giving them direction, and who will they be interacting with? And Sam, those were all important points before when we were all in person. They're even more critical now. And I say because I've observed from the client side, some managers are fantastic in a virtual environment, grooming and ramping new people. Other people, let's just say, are not as skilled in that. And there are people on your existing client teams who are wonderful in-person trainers, but when asked to do it in a virtual environment, it just hasn't translated. And so those are a couple of my real tips for success. Look at the job description, and then also look how you're going to integrate this person, and also be patient. That'd be my third one. Don't judge the person who just started in the first week of the project. There's always a feeling out period, and there's some give and take. I have saved many, many projects after the first week where maybe the client was calling me or the candidate was calling me and saying, oh, this may not be the right fit. And I kind of counseled each party through it, and it ended up being a very successful engagement and a lot of times resulting in an attempt to hire.
Very good. Thank you. And Sharronne, from your perspective, let's say from a candidate standpoint, or maybe advice from once you're already working with a particular client, what tips or advice do you have on that end? If someone's going to reach out to you or someone needs support, what tips do you have, and really some benefits of working with Cordia?
Well, from a candidate standpoint, I've been doing recruiting for about 17 years, and I think that Cordia is by far one of the best agencies. Just from our redeployment program as well as our customer care program, I think that it's a great agency to partner with if you are looking for some consulting work. And then to piggyback off of some of the things that Doug said, we're in a completely different, in a new space right now. So I would ask that candidates be a little patient with their projects. Everyone wants remote and everyone wants hybrid, but be prepared to work in a remote or hybrid environment. Hybrid and remote does not mean that you do not have to work. You are still working, you're just home. So make sure that you are, do some self-evaluation, make sure that you're self-motivated and that you can work in that type of environment so that you can be successful in that role. And as Doug mentioned, we're seeing more conversions than ever. So coming on as a consultant is a great way to get your foot in the door and get with an organization to get that permanent opportunity that you're looking for. And as I've always said with consulting, it's a great, try before you buy from a consultant standpoint as well as a client standpoint.
Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to ask, before we close up, I think we touched on this a bit when we were chatting about this episode. In terms of on the client side, in terms of volume of candidates, are you seeing good success with having a conversation, let's say with a new client, and being upfront about the fact that this market's different? If I get you one or two really good options, if someone is available to start next week, the days of probably having 5 or 6 candidates who are just waiting around is probably gone, right? Are you seeing good success with maybe the quality over quantity in terms of if this person, these 2 people are available, if you talk to them, better get them started quickly and not drag your feet, otherwise you're going to lose them. Have you seen that as well?
I have, I would say 90% of the time, and it really starts from the beginning. So, when Doug or one of my, other managers speaks to the client, they kind of put it out there and then they introduce the client to me, and I'm reiterating, like, we have to move on these candidates because you're right. If I talk to a candidate on Monday, by Wednesday, they could be gone because, the market is just that volatile. So putting the message out there, I would say 90% of my clients are getting it. And they're like, yeah, Sharronne, I'll get back to you immediately because they understand. Yeah.
Any thoughts from either of you about what things are going to look like a year from now? Are we going to, any trends, anything to look out for, or are we getting ahead of ourselves?
Wow. Looking forward, and this is one of the conversations I have with my clients all the time. It's kind of a wait and see, Sam. Just the current economic environment that we're kind of going into, coupled with still having this what I call the labor shortage. It's unprecedented. I've never seen it in my 23 years, and I worked for a national firm as well. It's kind of a wait and see. It's going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds.
Yeah. Yeah. The low rate of employment, but inflation is a really interesting. Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate your time. If you want to look up Doug or Sharronne, if you need any support, if you're a candidate not sure where to turn, or you're a company that needs some support, needs some staffing support, please reach out to Doug. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you for the opportunity, Sam.
Of course. Well, this is wraps up our episode. Check in, here in the next couple weeks, and we'll probably have one more coming out in December, and then we'll be back in 2023. So again, thank you for tuning in this episode of Talking Talent.